Paul Peterson. Glad to meet
Wow,
you
how do
for
you?
the first time.
Right.
We are at the Smithsonian at the Herbarium, the National Herbarium, and Paul is a grass specialist. He spent the majority of his life working on grasses, and Paul's going to go over, in a big picture sense, the grass family and start maybe a little bit globally, but get us into North America and the US. And Paul's probably going to talk about some characters and features. And it's such a big topic that it's hard to say where we're going to start. And then I'll do my usual and ask the dummy questions towards the end. But
Right.
but I wanted to mention that there's a long history of agrostologists, people who study grasses that have been at the Smithsonian, and maybe as part of your introduction,
Okay.
you could mention who they were, because I think they'll know the names.
hmm Yeah, since about 1896, we've had a long line history of agrostologists working here in our museum in the herbarium, and it started with Hitchcock, and then progressed.
And AS,
Yeah,
to distinguish from CO.
yeah, that's right. A.S. Hitchcock, and then Agnes Chase, Doug McClure, Swallen, and then I replaced Tom Soderstrom in 1988. So we've always had agrostologists here that have worked with our collection, and it's probably the best collection for North, Central, and South America.
Huh.
So stuff in Q is real important in that they have collections from Africa and Eurasia, but we have the best collection here, about 500,000 specimens,
Oh,
of which over 100,000 types and fragments are just grasses. So if you work on grasses, you got to come here because we have about 85% of the types for all grasses in North, Central, and
wow,
South
I
America.
didn't realize there was that many in
Yeah.
number. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And things are based on a type, so
Yes.
you start with a type concept, and it's based on a specimen housed in a particular herbarium, and that's the basis of a plant species name.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't realize it was even that big.
Mhm.
Okay.
All right, so I'll start with the grasses. The grasses that were recognized early on, I think one of the first scientists recognized them before Christ as a group, and then about in the 1800s, Brown recognized two groups of grasses. So the family was recognized as a family, and then within the family, subfamilies were recognized by Brown, and he recognized two. Today there's more than 12,000 species in the family, a little less than 800 genera, and we have about 50 tribes and 85 or so sub-tribes. So that makes up the grass family, and like I said, 12,000 species. Within the New World, North, Central, and South America, there are approximately 4,000 species, and within the United States, which you want to talk about, there are about 1,500 grass species in the United States, including Canada. Yeah.
And if I could ask, where is probably the highest diversity of grasses in the U.S., you think?
The highest diversity of grasses in the U.S. Are we talking political unit like a state or?
Yeah, or just an area, southwest U.S., southeast.
That's probably a good question, but yeah, probably the Southwest, primarily because California and the deserts there have the most diverse habitats, and so you get different things coming in different habitats.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably why. Yeah.
Well, I was just trying to set it up so
Uh-huh.
people that do grasses
Okay.
out there, they feel better.
So what are the salient features of grasses? Well, the grass family, like I said, is easily recognizable. Any layman usually can say, oh, hey, that's a grass. And what the characteristics that are most important are the fruit type. The fruit is a caryopsis, which is dry. It's an indehiscent fruit that is called a seed or a grain, and that grain has endosperm, starch, it has protein, and it has some fat, and it's the basis of civilizations because 70% of the Earth's food comes from grains. And of course, the grass family includes corn, rice, wheat, oats, rye, barley, and teff. So it's very important, the grass family. It's the fact, I'd say it's the most important flowering plant family. Okay, other salient features in the grasses include the reduced inflorescence at the tip of a branch. It's called a spikelet. Now, a grass spikelet usually consists of two lower bracts that are called glumes, and then above those are one or more florets. And a floret consists of a lemma and a palea. And within the palea is the flower portion of a grass, and that consists usually of two or three at the very base, fleshy or hyaline to membranous loticules. And these loticules function to open up the floret during anthesis. And so what is anthesis? That's when the stamens are free and they're shedding their pollen. So the flower of a grass, really, loticules correspond to other flowering plants, the petals and the sepals. So it's not showy, it's very tiny. In fact, their loticules are usually less than 0.5 millimeter in length. They're very tiny, but they are diagnostic. So then within the palea sits the loticules, the ovary, which has either 2 or 3 stigmas, that's the receptive portion to pollen grain for germination, and then the stamens.
Okay.
So that's what's important on grasses, and the axis of that spikelet is called the brachilla. So the axis of an inflorescence, the whole inflorescence of a grass, is called the rachis. Now, the culm, the next important thing, the branch that has the inflorescence is called a culm, and there are nodes and internodes. And on those nodes and internodes, there are leaves. And a grass leaf is also diagnostic in the grasses because it has parallel venation. It's narrow, it doesn't rebranch, it doesn't reticulate. And it's divided into a sheath and a blade. And at the junction of the sheath and the blade is a small structure called a ligule. And that's usually on the adaxial surface or adjacent to the culm. And these are diagnostic features vegetatively in the grasses. Okay, what else is important in grasses? They have adventitious roots. These are roots that are born usually at a node at the base of the plant after development of the primary root, because it doesn't last very long in a grass, maybe 3 or 4 months, and then it sends out adventitious roots. Another feature of the grass family are its intercalary meristems. Now, intercalary just means that it's near a node, so the actively growing part of a grass is near a node. And so you can cut a grass, but it grows from the base. So at the base of the culm is where the grass will resprout. So it's very resistant, and it can live very well with grazing. So it can be chopped off, it can be burned off, and then resprout at the base and grow. And that's led to its dominance in the world, because 25% to 35% of the earth is covered in grasslands. So it's very good at that, and it's wind pollinated. The pollen grains are small, they're easily moved around, so it can be pollinated. That doesn't require a vector or a bee to move its pollen from one plant to another. So that has made it very important. Another important feature of the grasses is that it has an alternative way to fix CO2, because plants fix CO2 because they produce oxygen. Okay, so it has its standard C3 way of fixing CO2, but it also, some of the group have C4, and they can fix carbon dioxide at higher temperatures and higher humidities. So it gives an advantage to certain groups of plants that live in dry, warm climates or hot and humid climates. So it has ecological amplitude.
Is that the reference to cold season and warm season
grass?
That's
exactly right. A warm season grass plant has the capability of C4 and C3, and a cool season it just has a C3. Most
so
plants
the
are all
C4
C3.
has both.
It has
I
both.
didn't
It has
realize
both.
that.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that gives it an advantage. And so it can grow in a lot of different climates. So you say, the earth is getting more CO2 in the atmosphere. Well, it doesn't hurt some grasses. It doesn't hurt them at all.
Oh,
They do
okay.
just fine
Yeah,
anyway.
Oh,
Okay, so all that's the part of the ecology of the grass, and that's brought into the grasslands, because you see that there are temperate grasslands, you brought that up, and there are savanna or tropical grasslands in the world. And in the United States, we have mostly temperate grasslands, and we have like prairie and steppe grasses. I'd say those are the two main divisions of the grasslands in the United States. So the steppe grasses would be where there is a lot less rainfall, and it's drier and hotter in the summer. And the prairie grasses would be like the central part of the U.S. where there's a little more rainfall, the soil's better developed, and those have turned into primarily croplands now because they grow grasses there like corn, wheat in our country.
right.
Yeah. So.
And as you get alpine or more polar, those are just extensions of a cold season grasses adapted to those conditions, more or less.
Exactly. There are a few warm season grasses that occur up in higher elevations, but for the most part, it is cool season grasses.
You have
that
an
occur.
example off the top of your head?
Yeah, there's some Muhlenbergias that get as high as 4,000 meters in South America.
Okay, I didn't realize Muhlenbergia was a four-season grass. Okay.
Yeah, it's a warm season grass. It's a Floridoid
okay.
grass. So the next thing is the classification, and we work on figuring out relationships among the groups, the genera, the tribes of grasses, and the newer classification, like I said, contains 12 subfamilies. So if we evolve, the sister to grasses is a small family called Ecdicoliaceae or Joinvilliaceae. Those are the two sisters that we know to the grass family. And they are grass-like, but they're not grasses. And then from there, we evolve groups of grasses. Now, the first three subfamilies that come off of a tree, and we have a radial phylogenetic tree that we'll show you, okay, are bamboos that aren't very common in the United States. Then the next clade after that is called the bop clade, and it includes the bambusoids, the rhizoids, and the pooids.
So they're at the
base.
The base.
The base of the
Oh,
tree.
I
So this is a
realized
radial tree.
bamboos were in the base.
Yeah, they're near the base, yeah.
Okay.
And bamboos are pretty easily recognized. Those are
Right.
woody plants,
Yes.
mostly woody, perennial. And we have, there's about 1,000 or 1,500 species in the Bambusoideae, but not very many in the United States. Arundinaria is like our
Arundinaria is
only,
the big one we
yeah,
have.
that's our only perennial native bamboo, really, in the United States. Oryzoideae, however, though, that's the rice subfamily. It's a little bit smaller, quite a bit smaller, in fact. But it includes like Leerzia, Zizania, wild rice, Zaniopsis, or like Oryza, those groups. So, and that's related to bamboos. And those bamboos are all C3 grasses because they're usually wet. They don't have the extra
Even though
system.
they're tropical,
Right.
pumpkin cane, for
Yeah.
those that know about fly rods.
That's right, but they're all derived from C3 grasses, and they have a few morphological features that set them apart. They have many stamens usually. Bamboos and the rices have many stamens, like 6.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, and the
Six,
wild
and most
rice.
other grasses have 3.
Yes.
So those are the characteristics of those groups. The pooid grasses, of course, are very diverse. There's over 4,200 species in the Pooideae, and those are the most common grasses in the United States in that subfamily, I'd say. Most prevalent, and there's at least 3 or 4 tribes that include probably the most widespread aquatic grasses, since you work on those too,
Right.
in that group.
Yeah.
Okay, then after the derivation of the bop clade comes the pacmad clade, and that includes 6 subfamilies. And the most common subfamilies would be the panicoideae and the chloridoideae. Both of those contain C4 grasses. Chloridoids are completely C4, and the panicoids have C3 and C4 and intermediates as well.
Well, that's why you see the panicoids up north, too.
Yeah, they're variable. They can
okay.
occupy large ecological amplitudes, and they can many habitats.
Right.
Okay. Okay, panicoids. And then there's one other subfamily that's important in the United States would be the Arundinoideae, and that has Arundo, which is giant reed, and also Phragmites. And there's been a lot of stuff done on Phragmites now because the predominant Phragmites australis in the United States is an introduced species that got here from Europe, Eurasia, and it's sort of been replacing the native subspecies of Phragmites australis.
Okay. Okay. And so when we teach plants, and I've mentioned this to you, which sort of stumped you a little bit, and that was I tend to use older 1960s, 70s vintage concepts of tribes following Hitchcock and Agnes Chase.
Right.
And so we use these tribes tend to have morphological spikelet or inflorescence features that sort them very, for people who don't know grasses very well, learning some of these tribal features gets into a group, and then we have take them to a genus.
It's probably better to use artificial keys that key directly to genera or artificial groups. For one thing, when we look at relationships and we find out more information, the genera of each tribe changes. Therefore, the morphological features of a tribe would change through time as well. So, learn genera, because we have a better concept of the genus now based on our molecular research, which can give us information on what true relationships a group has based on its molecules from one.
Well, now I'm going to try to dig myself out of this hole and say, well, when we teach, I always say we're using older vintage tribe terms and concepts because of the morphological aspects are much easier to learn. Would you suggest that I just call these groups and not call them tribes?
Yeah,
then we key to the genera from there.
Yeah, you could do that. I mean, I learned keying from a textbook that was produced in the 60s by Gould, and it had an artificial key to the genera. And that's probably the best way to go because, classification, there are other taxonomists that work and our ideas and we refine relationships as we find out about them is what it boils down to.
And so back over the history of the taxonomy of the grasses recently in the last century or so, it was all morphological based. And then we got into some of the with chromosomes and some of the early what was called chemosystematic techniques. And now we're into the DNA molecular analysis. What percentage or how similar are the new DNA concepts to things that have been done historically?
Right. Well, the grasses, since they lack a lot of morphological features of the flower, taxonomists in the grass groups have worked with all information. So we based a lot of our information on anatomy. So anatomy, morphology, how is the plant built? You do a cross-section of the leaf, you look at its structure, how it's built. And like I talked about earlier, the C3 and C4 grasses have different morphological features of their leaves and cross-sections. So they have that to go on as well.
Okay.
So all of our knowledge was based on the whole plant up until that point, but it was primarily morphology. And I'd say the early people that worked there probably had a classification that was maybe 75 to 80% of what we know today and how things have changed. So it was pretty accurate using that information. But there was no way to polarize or to look at a character and see if it was derived or ancestral. So that was the big problem. And now that we have this information, we have a little better classification, and as good as we have now, working at DNA molecules, mostly a few number of genes that we compare that we work with now. But we're moving into the field to use the whole plastome and the whole genome as well, the nuclear as well. So
Mhm.
that we'll see if it sheds any more information. It might cloud it up. You know.
So, um, so grasses probably evolved where? How long ago?
Well, yeah, that's another thing. They keep pushing back the age of grasses. Right now, we pretty much agree that they arose sometime maybe 60 or so million years ago. That's
That's very
right,
recent.
and then expanded in the Miocene
Mhm.
with the expansion of mammals. So they hit grasslands are relatively new. They came into existence maybe 10 million to 5 million, somewhere in that range, years ago.
Wow.
And that was the expansion of mammals and occupying the grasslands. So they expanded during that time. But the grasses have been around quite a while, older than that, but more as a peripheral. Grasses, they like disturbance, so they grow on margins of other habitats, of other vegetation types.
Mhm.
So, that's one thing that's helped them to evolve, so they can occupy places that have pretty good disturbance.
Now, in other families of plants, uh, the evolution follows plate, as you go back, has plate tectonics and movement. And
Right.
I'm assuming grasses have similar.
Right. Most of the continents moved before the grasses became prevalent.
Oh,
so
right, that's true.
But
Yeah.
but grasses, like any other thing, like plants, even though they're stationary, they move around pretty easily. They can be eaten by birds, and birds fly. They can be transported by people. I mean, they move around. They get around. So probably not continental drift is not really too important in explaining the current distribution of
Okay.
grasses.
All right, interesting. And then, of course, I can't leave this one alone. The cultivation, the beginning of cultivating grasses, from the breadbasket, I guess.
That's
is
right.
The theory.
Well, like I said earlier, at the very beginning, I said that all civilizations have evolved usually by some cultivar, some grain.
Right.
So grasses have been cultivated a long time, as long as people have been living together in somewhat harmony. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's been important. So people have always affected, say, the size of the fruit, the qualities of a fruit, of a caryopsis of the grain, in order to make their breads, their grains.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And to follow that one,
Okay.
I've never asked a grass person. There were others, the new grasses.
Yeah.
I may have asked them something else, but corn. Corn does not have anything particularly that looks in the wild looks like corn. So corn has been a human-developed grass.
That's right.
And is teosinte still thought to be a progenitor old?
Right. Yeah. It's like an ancestral form of a corn, or at least a hybrid between that and modern corn, and that was formed by people as well. They keep selecting for a larger ear,
Mhm.
for the fruit to have more spongy tissue in it, the corn cob, the corn kernels. Yeah, so that's been important. And where did it evolve, the corn? That's a good question. Some people say the first corn plants came from Mexico or somewhere in Central or Northern South America. We're not sure exactly the exact spot, but it is a New World grain, that's for sure. Whereas wheat probably evolved, or most likely evolved, in the Far East.
Mhm.
Yeah, Eurasia.
Now, if you were going to suggest to those who want to man up to learning some grasses, but a good field guide or book or whatever, what types? Any suggestions what they might start? What I at the Revised Agnes Chase is something we use.
Oh, you still use that?
Yeah. Well, it has great explanations in it.
Yeah, let's see. I've got an old copy sitting right here. I still use this, and this old copy, it says How to Identify the Grasses and Grass-like Plants
Oh,
by H.D. Harrington.
Yeah, okay.
And,
Yep.
you know, when I teach a course in that, it's got a glossary of terms,
Okay.
which is really good. And then it lists definitions for all these structures. I use this, but of course you want to use the most up-to-date you can find on local flora,
Right.
because the local flora is going to have the names of current use, and that's important too,
Right.
that you learn them that way.
Right.
And so in this area, I used the new flora of Virginia,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, for
Yeah.
local
Mhm.
grasses. And they've followed all our new information on DNA, so they have the most up-to-date
Oh,
nomenclature as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Okay. So, what would you say your most rewarding, biggest thrill of having the honor of being able to work at the Smithsonian as an agrostologist or taxonomic grass botanist?
Yeah. Okay. That's a big one. Well, earlier I mentioned, we have the best collection of grasses for the New World, for the Western Hemisphere. And if you're going to do systematic or taxonomic research, you have to look at types, and we have those, so we can look at those. And then being allowed to work here, I don't have any other responsibilities. My responsibility are for research. That's it. So
I see a smile on your face.
so I don't have all these administrative tasks. I don't have to teach when I have to teach, so I can just do research, and that's really nice.
Yeah.
You know, it's really nice. And we have a nice now
You're
molecular
smiling
lab.
more and more here.
And they just say, do your research, and we're left up to our own to do our own research, decide where we want to go. And I've traveled throughout the world collecting grasses all over the world, and it's just a fun place to be.
Yeah. Wow. Good. Well, great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Paul.
Okay.
I'm not cutting you off, but we try to keep these short enough so that people don't hang up on us, so to speak.
Okay.
So I appreciate your time
All right.
and your enthusiasm, and particularly your knowledge.
All right.
And you've been able to explain it really well. All right.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks.